Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 268. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today I am pleased to be joined by Edwin Ocasio, better known to everyone as Junny Ocasio. Junny, how's it going, buddy?
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on. I just pretty awesome to be back.
I am happy to have you here, man. Now, we talked about booking you for a while and having you on, but something has happened in the recent past year that's worth mentioning. Congrats on winning your first world championship, buddy. That's a big one.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. A lot of hard work and just been a crazy year. I think I'm still getting used to always chasing that title, and now I have the title of like world champion, so I gotta just get used to that, you know?
So now you can just take your foot off the gas and be lazy for the rest of your life, right? There's no need to do anything else.
That's right. I retired, you know? No. I'm in it for a legacy. So yeah, it's going to be, I had to rejuggle my goals, and I'm still like working on a couple and seeing how I do things. But yeah, you really don't know what you want to do till you get it. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, what next? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But it's not in me to not work hard. So I have to just get the next level stuff, you know?
Absolutely. Always good to be looking at the next level too. Well, hey, for those who did miss the memo, why don't you give yourself a quick intro? Tell everyone who you are and why 2023 was such a big year for you.
Well, my name is Edwin Junny Ocasio. Like you said earlier, most people call me Junny Ocasio. Fairly any people call me Edwin. Probably only call me Edwin because it comes up in my actual competition sometimes. I'm a black belt on the Murillo Santana, and I have so many accolades, but 2023 was the year I won my major accolades, meaning like I've won everything you could possibly imagine. I have instructionals, I have fight to win champion, I've fought on the biggest stages in the world since like 2017, and I've won pretty much everything I've touched except for majors, meaning like the big competitions, I would always fall hitting third place literally since like 2019, like always third place. And if you know anything and you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, you know, at some point your dream might be to be a world champion, and very few get to reach that dream. And I was able to become that world champion this year, but not only that, I was able to win all three majors in a row, back to back, which is a feat not many people can do or have done. And I'm just super kind of in awe that we got it all done this year. It's just been a lot of work that's been gone into that. So 2023 is one of those years where like I think I only lost 2 matches, and there were matches I really didn't want to fight in, and anything I really put my mind to are like all my major goals that I put on that calendar or on that fridge in my apartment. We made it happen, and it's honestly still a little surreal, you know?
Yeah, well, huge congratulations to you, man. That is just a massive series of accomplishments. Now, I have to ask before we launch into the topic today, is there anything that you can attribute to that massive run of success you had in 2023? Was there anything that you changed in your camp or in how you train or in your mindset that you think led to that run? Or was this just the natural culmination of the trajectory that you were already on?
I think it was a natural trajectory after we've changed a lot of things. I definitely changed a lot of things in the structure of my training. I was training very smart the last couple of years, but this last 2023, I really embraced the mental work and really was able to level up. I mean, I've been working on my mental health for probably like really hard, like really like not casually working on it, like really like being like, you know, effort into mental work and mental health since like 2021. And so like 2023 was a year where I was in a much different place in my life, and I was able to use all the techniques I learned throughout all the years from all the mental coaches, and I was able to change also. I was also to change some of the structure of the training and up the situational training so that I got so used to competing in a rule set that I knew all the rules, and I knew that all the stuff that would normally annoy me, something as simple as like keeping base the whole entire training session, that we made that a normal thing. And so like it didn't affect me when I went to go train to fight. So I feel like it's like a mixture of a bunch of things, but it's something that we changed, but we also kept doing it and we kept evolving that idea. So like with the mental health, we kept working on it and then we kept evolving. Yeah, same thing with the training, just training the same way, but always like doing something a little bit different, a little bit more smarter, because as they say, right, like if you want new results, you need a new habit and you can't keep doing the same thing. So I really embraced that. One of the biggest changes I think that attributed to me performing so well was I was able to really dive into the weight cut process as far as like being very healthy about the weight cut process. In 2022, I like the end of 2022, like halfway through the gi season, I was able to get a nutritionist for weight sports and cutting and wrestling, and that really played a major role. I learned a lot about nutrition. I learned about like what was healthier, what I needed, and a lot about my food, portions, carbs, kind of all that stuff, and just making the weight really healthy, like super healthy. So when I was out there, I would perform at peak performance. Now, there's some hiccups with this process as you're getting used to it and you're trusting a process and giving up your old habits. And so it was hard. I even missed weight 2 times doing this process, which I never have done in my life. But doing that made it so effective and so perfect that I would come out every fight just like as if I was fresh every single fight. And so that was one of the biggest things. And second biggest thing I must say is I took the foot off the gas in the final 2 weeks preparing for the competition, meaning I would not do as much. I would go to sleep a lot earlier. I would rest a little bit more. I would train really, really hard for that hour and a half, but then I shut it down and I wouldn't overtrain anymore. And I'd rest and I'd let my body heal. And because we had good nutrition and we were not like killing ourselves to make weight anymore, we were, I was performing really well. So there's a lot there. And I'm sorry, that was a long answer, but it's just so many things that went into like a pot that we stirred together to get those results, So yeah, so I feel like those were the things that made the 23 run so special.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing. For those who don't know, on BJJ Mental Models Premium, we have a peak performance podcast called The Highest Levels, hosted by Emily Kwok and Joe Hannon. And you were interviewed on there recently, Junny, before you won the World Championship, actually, by Emily. And I know she unpacked a lot of stuff with you about strategies for achieving peak performance. And I definitely recommend people give that a listen if they haven't already. But something I wanted to unpack here today with you was something you actually mentioned on that podcast with Emily, which is you talked about how it's important not to over-optimize your training, because at some point, no matter how much you try to optimize, you have to just ultimately get on the mats and do it. And I think that this is a problem that a lot of people, myself included, deal with in jiu-jitsu, especially anyone who's kind of plugged into the jiu-jitsu meta. We're always looking for new training methods and new strategies. And it's easy to kind of get lost in the sauce because you're just trying to chase every new trend that comes up. And sometimes people do forget that ultimately there's no substitute for just doing the work. I'd want to hear maybe your thoughts on this as someone who did just put a lot of thought into re-optimizing all of your training methods. What are your thoughts on over-optimizing, and is that a problem that you've seen people run into, and what are the solutions to such a problem?
I mean, I think you nailed it right there, like over-optimize and sometimes under-optimizing, to have a perfect secret ingredient to your training is important. I think the main thing for me is I'm very, very big on the work. Like I'm like super big on the work. Like you have to do the work. You have to show up. I think a lot of people these days, they want to do shortcuts. And like, I talked about this last time, is that like, a lot of the purple belts and blue belts these days, I don't know, man. I came up through Murillo Santana. So in I think I started like 22 years old or 23. And, Murillo put me through rigorous training and really like built my mental fortitude up, as well as having competition experience like 24/7. I think that showing up and doing the work and getting that experience in competition all the time, and also like going through some really hard training that really fatigues you, not so much like technically, but like physically and mentally, and make sure you can handle that. Because a lot of people can handle hard training for like a day, for like a month, for like 2 months, for like a year, for like 2 years and 3 years. What about year 5, year 6, year 10, year 12? You know, I've seen a lot of people burn out. I mean, I burnt out like 20 times, but I was able to keep pushing through. And some people burn out and they quit. And so like, it's important to remember, like, you need in my opinion, you need a hard balance, you know, like you need a good balance. Now, balance, for what I've learned through my experience, balance for everyone is different. Nobody's the same. I love high volume training. I train a lot more than a lot of my other teammates. I constantly train. I actually have to flex myself not to train. Like, if I was to do any more training sessions, I would literally just be like dead every day. I love volumes of training. One is that like I actually love training. So like for me, it works really well. Some of my teammates, they do very well. They're very established and they don't train as much as me. They actually take a lot of days off for competition, which I don't. I'm like very heavy about doing 1 session a day, no matter what, even if I'm competing, but controlling that tempo and being smart about how we do things. Like, if you're doing well with your nutrition and you do training every day, there should be no reason why you can't train every day, right? But you also have to make sure that you change the tempo for certain training sessions. So like, you can't, in my opinion, you can't have like the same training session be like 100 24/7, because then you give no room for growth. You don't really grow when you're fighting at 100%. You grow when you're fighting at more like 50, 60. You need a good balance there. And I think these days, a lot of people, they get away with like me and talked about this again, being on super fights, not going through the circuit. You know, like when I was coming up, there's no super fights. So you had to go to the tournament. And your tournament, Mike, you know, my weekend of a tournament would be like, every weekend would be a tournament. And I'd have like 6 fights, 7 fights, 8 fights in one day. And then I'd go next weekend again and again and again and again. And now these days, people go and they fight one match and they don't really get that mat time. They don't get the experience of fighting in a tournament. So now you see less and less good guys coming up to win like tournament style stuff, because they don't really have that experience of get that mat time throughout the time frame. So I think being optimized is a hard topic, because everyone always wants to have the fad of like, you know, like this is what this person is doing. Well, to a certain degree, I think there needs to be balance. You need to actually do the work. You need to figure out what's the schedule that works for you, that you can commit to, that you could constantly do, right? Over and over and over again. And then we have to train smart. We have to know that we're doing some hard training, just rounds where we're not really thinking. And then we have to do very like specific training where we're thinking. And we have to do like a flow training where we're kind of thinking, but not thinking. There's just different styles of how you train, and you need to incorporate all those styles. And then of course, you know, being there actually every day to do the work, even on some days where you don't really feel like you don't want to train. A lot of these, in my opinion, a lot of people are very lazy. They only want to do stuff when they feel good and they feel rested. And that's just not how life works, you know? So for me, there's a lot of days I'm tired and I just, you know, I don't even think about it. I don't even make it a thing. I just get up and I go in and I go train.
Got it. Now, where do you land in terms of the importance of things like study? One of the things about jiu-jitsu in the last 10 years or so is there's been just this never-ending explosion of new content that's out there. I mean, we're part of that, right? There's no shortage of jiu-jitsu content that you can get out there, and you could wind up easily making jiu-jitsu study basically a full-time job at this point. And so this is, I know, a stressor that a lot of athletes and hobbyists as well face, which is just that it feels like no matter how much you've taken the time to learn, it's just never enough. And so I know people who spend just a massive amount of time studying the meta, but I wonder to some extent, is there diminishing returns in that? Is there a point where, you know, watching that 20th instructional is just not going to help you? I would love to know at high level comp, what do you do when it comes to that kind of study? Is that something that you invest your time in, or do you focus more on just getting the reps in and getting to the mat to get the work done?
No, actually, I study a lot. I do study. I have a particular way I like to study. I don't really love to just absorb a full instructional and then just watch it and then try to go emulate their stuff. That's false, because when it comes to instructionals, when I study, I look for more of like, for me, it's like I study and I look for like 3 things in the whole thing, right? Like I could watch a whole Mikey Musumeci instructional and go through 6 hours of content just to find like 4 things, 5 things that'll be worth it for me, because it'll be something that is like a concept thing or something that maybe they do a little differently. But to sit there and say, like, I'm going to go back and I'm going to emulate this exactly the way this is, and I'm going to do this exactly the way it goes, it's just different. You're not that person. So, like, I could teach you a heel hook, and I could teach you, like, how to do it in instructional, like, the exact way I do it. But you're never going to do it like me, because I have my own style of heel hooking. You might have different leg dexterity. You might have flexibility. You might have, mobility issues. You might have to do things. But if you can take the breaking mechanic concept and you can use the entry and innovate your own entry, that's a different thing, right? So like that's a kind of where I like take studying. I love to study. In my mind, in this day and age, I only study resourceful content. So people I know that know either they have experience doing the technique and they do it at a high level, or they're a very good instructor that pays attention to what's really going to work in a high level competition versus the thing that's going to work one time against a high level person and then it'll never work again. So there's like the differences between those. Now, a problem here that we have is like people will like put up crazy shit, drills, all that stuff, no explanation as to like how it's going to work at a high level. And then also like, you have to take into account, like when you're studying something, am I going to be able to pull this off against every single person that I see, not just a blue belt? Now, of course, in the beginning, you'll never be able to pull it off right away against a black belt, but you'll be able to pull it off at a high level once you practice it a bunch of times and stuff. But my bigger thing that I do is I go and take every movement and I troubleshoot it and I see how it works for me. If it works for me, if it works for my body type, if it works for me against somebody big, somebody small, somebody, tall, long. So my studying process is a lot longer than other people's because I don't just go off of studying. I go off of studying a particular move. And so right now, for instance, I'm studying knee bars. I'm restudying knee bars. And in an effort to try to get my leg entanglements to the next, even a further level of understanding, I went to certain sources and I was studying. I know almost everything that they do, but there's a grip or two that changes things. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I could take that idea. And I play with that grip for like the last 2.5 weeks. I play with like 1 to 3 topics and I play with it, especially in the times I'm not competing. And I start to play with whatever it is and I start to pay attention and try to play around how to critique it, how to fix it to my style. Does it match me? Things like this. Some little ideas to kind of innovate and take that style, that instructional, and make it your own and infuse it into your game. And that is super important. You need to troubleshoot it after you study, because you thinking that you're just going to study this the way this is. It's like me saying, I got to do Gordon Ryan stuff, and I'm a light featherweight that fights in a light featherweight division that has so many different guards and so fast, so on point, that it's going to work exactly like that. It's not going to work like that because they're too fast. Their guards are way more dynamic than the heavyweight weight class, so like you have to take that into account, speed, timing, all that stuff. I think that there's a lot that goes into studying, but essentially you need to troubleshoot it once you learn it. And then once I learn the troubleshoot, I go back and I'll critique and take what's good, what goes well with me, and then I can put it into my own system. And then from my own system, I can make a whole new thing from it.
Nice. Now, if I understand correctly, it sounds like what you're talking about is rather than just watching some instructional and trying to kind of copy paste every technique that you learn there and just do it exactly like it is there, it sounds like what you're proposing here more is to sort of deconstruct what actually makes those techniques work in a general sense, look for the little details you might be missing, and then try to rebuild that in your own game. Is that correct?
Yes, man. You said it so much better than me. But yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of what a lot of those ecological dynamics guys are talking about. This is something I think that they're onto, which is important for people to understand.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that because the ecological approach is like just the term, but I don't really like follow their exact training because that is like the same thing as me doing a lot of stuff. But yes, their concepts of it is accurate.
Yeah. For those who missed the memo on that, I mean, we've had a lot of good conversations about eco recently, but the general idea that they propose is that you can't really ever just copy and paste knowledge out of someone else's brain and into yours. The human brains don't work that way. You can't just kind of like extract knowledge and just duplicate it directly from brain to brain. You learn by doing things through the body. And that direct perception is very much an important part of how we learn, or so the eco guys propose. And I think that anyone who's trained jiu-jitsu for more than a month has probably felt this problem where someone will show them a technique and they'll say, oh, just do these 10 steps. It works for me. And you try it and you find out doesn't work for me, right? It could be very frustrating because you'll look around the room and you might see other people doing it just perfectly and flawlessly, and then you try to do it and it just doesn't work the same. And it can feel like there's something wrong with you. But honestly, the big thing is just that, look, we've all got different bodies. We all have different ways that our bodies move. Or we could be sparring, again, like you mentioned, with people of various body sizes. Jiu-jitsu at the end of the day is not some magical, mystical thing. It's just leverage, right? It's just biology. And if your limbs, for example, are not long enough to do a certain move properly, that's just always going to affect how effectively you can do it, as opposed to someone who might be better suited for that. And this can be frustrating for a lot of people because I think they go into things like instructionals hoping that they can basically study it like they used to cram in high school, where they just try to memorize everything and then go out there and just do it. And then, like you said, they're kind of disappointed that they weren't able to just copy and paste Mikey Musumeci's entire game simply by watching his instructionals.
It just doesn't work like that. Yeah, like you're not going to be able to bolo exactly like Mikey right in the beginning because you need experience. You need years of doing it 24/7. So it's just going to be very hard to do that. Like, for instance, like I'm really, really, really good at K-guard. You could throw K-guard at me all day, but like I'm really good at K-guard. But I also do it in a different manner. And like I've been doing it for a while now, and I've troubleshooted it, and I have my own philosophies for that move, So there's a really big thing that's important to state. There's like this difference, right? There's like gi-esque jiu-jitsu, where the gi is the cloth that's connected to the bone structure. So like a lot of gi competitors are really good at guard retention because of the cloth they're so used to. So their guard retention is really on point. And then you have no-gi structured guard retention, which is pure bone retention that needs to be respected because it's the pure skeleton. So like you're not really going off of like a cloth. In my experience or my philosophy or my idea is that you need both styles together to make a really good hybrid guard. So like you need to have, there's the structure of the skeleton, and then there's almost this, the move's going to work if you do this or this, because it's debated on their structure 8 times out of 10. And then there's the 2 times out of 10 that I always tell my students is that there's gray area. The gray area is somebody's special ability. It's somebody's ability to break those rules because that's kind of what they do with their body, something that we can't obtain for. So for every move, I can say like the person can only do this, this, and this if they have this done correctly, or like controlling this breaking mechanic. But there's always this 1 to 2, like 2 times out of 10 where, the person has gray area where there's like, out of all the things you've memorized, they do something you don't know because they're good at it, or maybe they do the wrong thing, but they get away with it with athleticism, stuff like this.
I am so glad you brought that up, man, because this is something I have beat myself up many times over my jiu-jitsu journey, having seen this myself, where I will be doing things and I'll feel like, man, I'm doing this wrong because no one else does it this way. No one taught me to do it this way. I've just made some little tweaks that seem to work for me. And maybe other people can't even duplicate it. Maybe I try teaching it to other people and it just doesn't work for them. But for me, it does. And there is that X factor to jiu-jitsu. So much of jiu-jitsu is about personal expression and what you kind of want your style of jiu-jitsu to be, especially as you get deeper into your journey. Everyone kind of starts putting their own stamp on things and developing their own little unique bits. And you bring up this great point about how everyone is an outlier at something. I mean, yes, if you look at kind of the broad general population, for any one specific weird oddity, there might be just a small percentage of people who are good at it. I mean, like Ezekiel chokes in no-gi, right? Maybe only 1% or less of the general jiu-jitsu population can even do those effectively. So it's not, that particular technique isn't something you need to always be super concerned about. But in the broad scheme of things, everyone is going to be in that 1% of something. Everyone's going to have at least one thing they do that they can make work, that is just totally weird and abnormal. I mean, I kind of reminded of Braulio Estima kind of busting onto the scene with a bunch of inverted triangles, which was so weird at the time that someone would do something like that. So there's always going to be something. And I spent a lot of my jiu-jitsu journey avoiding that and running from that, because I would be doing weird things and no one else would do them. And my thought was, well, I must be doing these things wrong then, because no one else is doing it. But what I kind of realized at some point is, look, we all just express jiu-jitsu differently. We have different bodies. Some things will simply work for you that won't work for other people. Something might be terrible jiu-jitsu for someone else, but if you can make it work, then it's not really terrible, right? It's just one of the unique things about your game.
I couldn't say it any better. Like, it reminds me of, like, I think it was Guy Mendes versus, I think it was Cobrinha. And I think it was like you underhooked the leg, and the person's not really supposed to be able to De La Riva hook you once you underhook their leg, and he was able to do it every single time. It was just like shows you that like most people can't do that, but some people, like, you know, they're more flexible. They have athletic backgrounds. They used to wrestle. They used to do something there. They have unbelievable power. There's so many variables. Like, for instance, like I fall from the top a lot on leg entanglements, but it's technically a positionally wrong thing to do unless you're in a certain position to fall for them. But it's kind of like my superpower. So like I respect the position, but I always teach my students, you know, this is something I do, but you're playing with fire. And like, if you fall down, you know, like you're giving up position and potentially could cost you a match, could cost you this, but you have to have faith that, you know, like if you're going to do it, it might be your thing. So if you're going to do it, I'm going to teach you the right way to do it. But I don't recommend you guys doing this, because I know that, you know, it'd be dumb to fall down for things, but I'm a finisher and I like getting subs, and I have a very innovative style. So it's like, even also the Junny lock I came up with, the structure-based counter to outside heel hook, is something that people end up hurting their legs with, or they can only hit it in one motion. I can hit it like 20,000 ways, and it's just so crazy because it's kind of tailored to me. And so, like, you know, it's just different for everybody. I think one of the main things, though, when you express this to students, or you're teaching students, or you're students yourself, you want to make sure if you have good sound guard retention, like your guard retention is good, your understanding of guard retention, whether it's gi or no gi, is really good, and you have good offense. Once you understand and know what you're doing, you're allowed to break the rules a little bit. So that's important, because you know structure based, like this, and this. Okay, well, now I know that I got all this, but I'm actually really good at this one thing, so I can break the rule here. And that's just important to know.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole bit about breaking the rules is a lesson I took way too long to learn. I spent so much of my early journey trying to just duplicate what other people were doing exactly. But that is part of the journey of growth and mastery and innovation. At some point, you have to look at what other people are doing and figure out how to add your own stamp on things, or how to tailor things so that it's more optimal for you. This happens to me all the time, where I'll learn a technique from someone else and I just can't make it work by myself. But like you said, I troubleshoot it, I make a few adjustments, and maybe I find something that I can do that makes it work. A lot of the time, it's something that no one else will do. You brought up, adjusting grips. Maybe I try something with a slightly different grip than everyone else does, and then suddenly it just makes the position or technique or situation way more viable for me than it had ever been before. And it always feels weird, because it feels like you're cheating or you're just making shit up. And we spend so much of our early jiu-jitsu journey just being told what to do by people. It's a bit of a system shock when you realize, oh, now I actually have to think for myself and build my own techniques.
I think it's nice to follow a blueprint. It's nice to follow someone that you have. And not everybody has. I was very lucky in my journey to find an instructor that had the experience, that's been teaching for years on end, and been a black belt for like 20 years, and was able to mold me and guide me and see things and innovate and do stuff. And so I was very lucky. But for people who are younger, man, they have so much knowledge. They can take, you could look at all the top guys, see how they do the guard retention. It's fairly similar. There's just little adjustments to how they do. How I do guard retention is very similar and praises my instructor, but it also has my own style of the guard retention that I developed through using two systems and blending them together. So while it still pays homage to my instructor, my knee cuts, my passing, my leg entanglements, there's a lot of me that it's like me learning leg entanglements from Eddie Cummings. I'm never going to be Eddie Cummings. I'm not Eddie Cummings. Eddie Cummings is amazing. He has these crazy dexterity in his legs, his strength, his knowledge, his everything. But I'm really good because I'm Junny, like I have my own style of leg entanglements that is a little different. It's a little bit more mobile. It infuses my game so that I don't get stuck in one leg entanglement, and I can continually go from positioning to leg entanglements. So there's just different styles of the stuff, and it's important to embrace that, but it's also important to remember while you're doing the gray areas, while you're finding your superpower, that you have respect for positioning and good guard retention. A lot of people skip that part. So they have a superpower, but if their superpower doesn't work and they don't have nothing else, they fall down, they fall apart. And so that's super important to remember too, is that if you still need really good fundamentals before you go crazy with your superpower, because without that, if it does fail and you do your superpower and it doesn't work on somebody, right? So you're really good at this one foot lock, really good, and it doesn't work. And all of a sudden, that's it. You did that, and now the person beat you up after that. It's because you didn't have the fundamentals to back that special move up. So I think while everything is awesome to be your own, troubleshoot and do all the stuff, I think it's very important to be fundamentally sound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even Superman had kryptonite as a weakness. We all do have weaknesses here and there. And although it's great to have a superpower, ultimately, while that might allow you to achieve amazing things, it's probably going to be your weaknesses that ultimately just dictate what your ceiling is. If you've got really exploitable weaknesses in your game, it doesn't matter how good you are at something else if someone can just exploit that weakness on you.
Yeah. If you're if you're really, really, really good at the De La Riva, really, really good at the De La Riva, but then I say man, I'm never going to let this kid get to De La Riva. And then you don't get to De La Riva, and that's it. You're done. Your game's over. Your jiu-jitsu's over. You didn't do this. That's when things start to get iffy, and you start to I'm really good at this thing, but if I get swept on my back, I'm not that great at getting past, or stopping the person from passing me. Those little things make a difference, and you need to be well-rounded at this day and age. You can't just rely on just one thing, but you should have the funnel. So when you're good at fundamentals, you have a nice funnel, so it funnels you back to your superpower always.
Yeah, that's a great element of strategy and game planning, is knowing what your strengths are, but not just expecting that you'll land in those situations, but deliberately structuring your entire jiu-jitsu to make sure you get to those situations. Lachlan Giles has talked about this on the podcast before, about how when you're setting up sequences in your mind about what you want your jiu-jitsu to look like and how to get from point A to point B, you have to make sure that those transitions actually make sense and that you have a way to do it. Having an amazing scissor sweep isn't going to do you any good unless you can get to the position and the situation where you would do such a technique anyway. So making sure that your game is coherent and cohesive, and that step A takes you to step B, that is a very important part of building your strategy, and always making sure that your strategy takes you to the best possible situation for yourself, which again, like you said, that might be different from person to person. I mean, for me, if I'm on top in your guard, I'm probably going to try to get to some sort of headquarters position. A lot of people, especially in the gi, don't like doing that because they don't like the threat of De La Riva guard. But for me, that's just never been something that bothers me. So again, different strokes for different people, right? We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And
it's important to, it's awesome you brought up Lachlan. I love Lachlan. He's a very good instructor and very good knowledgeable in everything, but in logical sense, he knows how to innovate and also be structured with his jiu-jitsu, which is important. And yeah, I can agree more with you with I'm a very fond believer. I love knowing more jiu-jitsu than everybody. I want to out jiu-jitsu everybody. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to win the fight. But I want to out jiu-jitsu every single way. I want to know the answer for everything. That's normally just not how jiu-jitsu works, but the probability in training each position and throughout your time frame, knowing extensively what's going on with each position, how it works, the concepts behind each position is important, at least for me. And I think that's where I differentiate from a lot of other people. So I go down this route of trying to know everything and then restudying positions so that I stay up to date with little things that people are doing. And then that's how I stay kind of just going wherever the fight goes. So I don't choose where the fight goes anymore. I play, and of course I want to hit something that I want to hit, but I take what's available. It always funnels back, but that's only because I'll be able to study and have all these positions that I've troubleshooted throughout the 15 years I've been training, 15 or 13 years, something like that. And it's something that people, I think, don't do anymore. They just study limited resources. They like flashy moves. I can't tell you how many people I train with have flashy moves, and they're awesome. But again, without fundamentals, I just don't think it's going to work.
Now, this kind of ties back to our core topic here, which is how do you call your shots when it comes to deciding what to study here? You talked about the importance of study, but it's also easy to go down this rabbit hole where you wind up wasting a ton of your time studying stuff that ultimately isn't really great content, or it's just not great content for you. And you talked about how the goal here is to find the right content for yourself and then to study through that to isolate the main lessons that are applicable to you and to try to integrate those into your game. How do you do that, though? Because for a lot of people, the challenge with anything like this is, where do I even start? I mean, in a world where any of us can go to BJJ Fanatics and there's thousands of instructionals there just at your fingertips, how do you know where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck when you choose to study something?
See, this is the funny part, is that like I really didn't study till like COVID hit. Like I didn't study anything. I just did jiu-jitsu and trained, and I followed my instructor's lead and whatever it is. So there wasn't nothing to study that much before 2020. 2020 is when it really exploded with like the instructionals. There wasn't that many instructionals in 2019. There wasn't that many there was like nothing in 2017. I came up and there was no instructionals. You had to go train with the person. So when I learned leg locks, I learned it from the guy. I didn't learn it from instructionals, so it's hard these days to say that, because like when I started studying, I was already a black belt. And because I was already a black belt, I just went back and said, I'm doing like 1,000 things wrong, I feel like, and I want to go back and I want to study and I want to restructure and really put effort into my training. And I was able to like kind of restudy everything about jiu-jitsu. Like every position. I'm maybe a little bit over the edge on how much I wanted to get better, that I was willing to like go through my sources and just continually break down my game and see the structure and go. But it changed the way I did jiu-jitsu and the way I thought and the way the rabbit hole I went down. And if I was a younger man, I wish that was at my fingertips. Now we're in a day and age where they have all this at their fingertips. So it's kind of like a downside is that you have too much, right? Like you have too many sources. I think that the first thing you should do is find credible sources. Sources that, one, not that you're just fans of. Like a lot of people are fans. This is where we differentiate. People are fans of like people who are being athletic and they just going from position to position and just like jumping around and doing crazy stuff. I like technical battles of jiu-jitsu, even if it has explosion, but it's technical. I like seeing chess matches. So I like seeing what like two guys are going to do and they both know the same stuff and like who's going to win that battle. That's important. A lot of people don't want to see that. So what they go do is the person hits one move in a tournament and then they go to that source and they want to just study that one move. What they don't realize is that like they're subsiding their whole knowledge just for that one move versus studying from a credible source where that person, doesn't get passed often, has good passing skills, and this person can hit these moves the way it is going. So that means the person is doing the move from a base of core fundamentals. So when you see that, that's like to me called a credible source. I go to a source that's in competition, that it's like, I don't care if the move is flashy and it's amazing and it looks fucking dope. If the person gets passed every fight, only finishes with that move, his fights with that move, to me, that's not enough or credible. You know what I mean? So one, credible source. That's my most important thing. Does the person have good jiu-jitsu or overall game where it's good? Or can this person hit this move at a high level all the time? And if they don't hit it, do they immediately lose? So that's important too. That tells me if the move's just a fad move or if the move is actually effective. After that, I would go and I would study the spots that you feel like need, that you're most weakest in. So meaning like guard retention. Normally it's usually guard retention, stuff like that. And once you're able to do those things, then you start applying offense, right? So for me, like having good guard retention is super important. And then being able to attack off that guard retention is important. So for me, that's like, I would personally study. I mean, I still do guard retention this day and age, but then, you can progress to whatever you want to study, but just make sure that you're studying at some point self fundamentals, half guard passing, half guard defense, butterfly passing, butterfly defense, close guard defense. And this is going to take time. It's not going to be where like you hit it and you can study everything on point. Like at some point, everybody's brain has a limit of information that it can obtain. And at some point, overstudying will be too much for you. Like you'll cancel out the information you have, especially if you have your instructor helping you as well. Now, I have a broad span of I can take a lot of information very quickly. And if I see it, I have this thing where I see jiu-jitsu in my fucking mind because I've been doing it so long that like when I think of a move, I sometimes don't need to actually do the move. I can put it in my brain and reframe it to see what structure I have. I know that sounds crazy. I know people like that sounds like I'm trying to like think highly of myself, but I just have this thing that I like can play with that sometimes and just constantly dig in my brain to see, okay, I do this with this tension and this tension. But that works for me, but like it takes time to structure it. You just need like over studying can also mess you up. So like a big thing is to make sure that you study the amount that you feel that you can obtain information, and then, you know, let it sit with that information and don't switch topics too much. Like many topics is too topics. This is another thing, right? Like for other people who are studying. For me, I study about up to 3-4 topics max for like 3 months. I don't switch topics, and I'll keep studying that topic if it has not become part of my game yet, or if I can't understand it. Sometimes I have to study something, I gotta go restudy it again. So like for me right now, it is restudying footlocks, all different types, and going over half guard offense and half butterfly defense and offense. That's literally what I'm troubleshooting for like the last, I don't know, since for a while now, for like 3-4 months. I may change a thing or two, but like I'm really trying to structure it, trying to try different people and people my size, heavier people. So it takes a while for you to like get this down before you're able to hit it at a high level with confidence. So like, you know, that's another thing is that, you know, people have to go back and sit down and be willing to do it. That's the problem, is that this goes back to the beginning subject that we talked about. People don't like to do the work. And that's the work. That is the work. And so if you're only willing to put in a little bit of work and a little bit of troubleshooting, then you're not really going to get as good as you want to get.
That's a great point. You know, people always listen to this podcast and they hear us advocating about things like concepts and mental models, and they assume that we must be implying that, well, you can learn jiu-jitsu just by thinking about it. But that's never been the point, right? You can't learn jiu-jitsu just by thinking about it, no matter how good you are at analytical thinking. At some point, you just have to do the work. You know, if you gave me one person and you told me to train them just by having them think about jiu-jitsu, and then you gave me another person and you had me train them just by practice without really explaining anything, the person who did the work is going to be better, right? Because there's no substitute for that. Even if your training methods are suboptimal, it's still better to have put in the time than to have just kind of lived in your head, but not actually got the time on the mat to train it.
Exactly. Like you could think about jiu-jitsu all day, and we all do, and you can play in your head. That's fine. But at some point, you have to get on the mat and you got to try to implement what you're doing. It's like chess players. Chess players think about their game 24/7. They study, they do it all day, but then they go play. You know what I mean? So like if they don't play, then you don't get certain things. You know what I mean? There's a lot that goes into jiu-jitsu training, and this is the exterior of actual competition. In competition, there's a lot that goes on. In the high-level competitions, in the major competitions, in the 2-day competitions, where you have to be mental fortitude, there's a lot going on. So like that's more when your mind comes into play more than the actual skill.
Yeah. It, it reminds me of how, just thinking about how coaches structure classes, they're always looking for a new optimal way to teach their students. That's another thing that I think you can run the risk of over-optimizing is how you coach. But at the end of the day, I've talked to some good coaches, and one of the things that I was told which stood out to me was, look, as a coach, really the best thing that you can do for most of your students is help them maximize quality training time. Right? Make sure that when you structure your classes, you structure it so that everyone is getting a lot of good quality training time. If you're structuring your games or your drills so that only, 10% of the class is actually training at any time, like a King of the Hill or a Shark Tank thing, that's not necessarily optimal because you're not maximizing time. So what proves to be most important from a coaching standpoint is things like making sure that your students are avoiding high-risk moves or avoiding the risk of injury, just trying to do things that will keep them engaged and active, because as a coach, keeping your students consistent and giving them high-quality rounds and reps in practice, that's where you can really help them more than anything else.
I couldn't agree more. I will implement some style of trainings, depends on the day, but the core training and the core basis of the way I like to structure things anyway is I really don't do that many drills. As far as like, I do drills, but I don't do that many warm-ups. I believe the warm-up should be done before class on your own time. I believe that you can want to get right to the techniques. We want to learn the techniques. We want to learn the concepts. So for instance, I've been teaching submissions to get my students to be more submission oriented and not just embrace position, to really go for the submission based off of position. So talking about breaking mechanics, concepts, and, the scenarios, but essentially just going back to the concepts of it. And then letting them apply it to their passing sequences or whatever sequences we went over previously. So we're integrating all the submissions from the previous curriculum. And one of the biggest things is doing situationals all the time. The whole first half of training is just situationals. It's just you practicing simple stuff, something as simple as to let a person keep their base, making sure they keep base, making sure they just don't fall over, making sure that they break grips and move, not just walking into the guard, having different stances in the guard, it being in a pat position, working out of certain positions. So there's just a lot of situationals, a lot of specifics, and then it'll always be structured for, situational, 2 stand-up rounds, and then there's back to situational, or maybe the stand-up rounds are situational, and then we get maybe 4 to 5 rounds of free rolling after, or maybe we do the free rolling first, and then I have them all do the situationals while they're tired and sweaty, and they have to, think and pay attention and keep base while they're sweaty. So those things are, I think, more important. And then once in a while, depending on the day, we'll do 3-person switch, or then we'll do King of the Hill in groups, but it won't be traditional King of the Hill. It'll be stuff that they have to come out. And then we'll do comp style rounds and comp style competition where they're kind of involved with each other and they're the refs and stuff like that. So it's a lot of stuff that goes into training for my class anyway that I implement. So I couldn't agree more with that. It's making sure they are very entertained and being there and being present. And one of the biggest things is that I want effort in my room. I don't care if you are a white belt. I don't care if you're a new 2-week white belt. I want effort in my room always, which is a lot of the times why I have a big room of people who absolutely love coming to train with me. But a lot of the newer people, sometimes they end up staying and they end up leaving because you cannot hide from me. It is effort all the way. And it's important because you're paying for a service that you want to get better in. And my job as a coach, what I believe in is, as a person who works really, really hard, I believe that at minimum, you control your effort. Effort is different for everybody, but it's your effort on the mat. How you do things. It's not really what you do, it's how you do them. How do you do that? You come in, you train, you pay attention, you work in that situational. Even when we're our men out, I make people share rounds. I make sure that they're ingrained. They do not get to just hide in the corner, So I couldn't agree more with, I don't do free rolling unless it's a day for fun or a day for recovery. So for instance, my class and a lot of my students, they help me with every single camp, especially leading up to the 2 weeks where we switched the class more to a competition style. And it ended up being where they put so much effort. So at the end, I gave them a week where they just had free rounds where they can relax, they can drill, they can do situational stuff like this. It's important to have those times, but normally it's situational. But that's how they grow. And the growth that they've had is so much better than letting them just free roll, Yeah.
I mean, I love free rolling. That's the fun part of jiu-jitsu. It's why the sport gets so addicting, but it's also, especially at the early stages when you don't know any better, it's very easy to just kind of fall into the trap of doing the same thing over and over again, because if it's a roll and the goal is to win, your inclination is going to be to do the things that are most likely to get you the win, which means you're probably going to be playing your A game, which means you're probably not going to be developing new skills, right? So
exactly, yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about effort, where the mind goes is, of course, physical effort. Are you actually putting in the physical work? But there's also the mental side of effort as well.
That is so important. I stress that all the time. Mental effort is not just the physical. Effort is I'm here, I'm paying attention, and I'm going to do my best job for myself and my teammates while I'm here. That's it. That doesn't mean you have to go ape shit and jump around and go faster or harder. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean that. So when I say effort, and I always stop to explain effort to my students, it's how you do a move. It's when you drill, how you do something. That's important because those little things you do is important. So I have a really big pet peeve when people drill and the person on top does like a square static dummy, and they're just kind of like half-assed the drilling. Well, they're doing this disservice to you and your training partner. What are you doing? You're supposed to be in a good stance. You're supposed to give them a little bit of, like movement so that they can feel it, so that the drilling actually becomes accurate. Otherwise, it's just shitty drilling,
Yeah. Something those eco dudes talk about is the importance of making your training as similar to a live environment as possible, or at least in the context of how you can do that safely and repeatably, right? I mean, you can't have every round be a comp round, but in terms of the resistance that you're giving and receiving and the situation, you want to make it as similar to a live environment as possible, because otherwise you run the risk of teaching them the wrong thing. If you teach me how to do a knee cut against an unresisting Junny, that is not a realistic skill set for me, right? The realistic skill set is I need to know what kind of resistance you're going to give, get experienced with that, and know how to handle that. There's no benefit in teaching someone a knee cut pass that they can only do against a grappling dummy.
I 100% agree. And like a way that I like to do this is, I always try to put a little bit of movement. But like, for instance, I have a private that I'm now teaching, and he's brand new, and it's easy to teach him because he has no bad habits. And so like, it's super easy. It's like a blessing when you get that. We're teaching him the passing, and I'm teaching him how to do a knee cut, and I'm teaching him like, what would happen if this happened and stuff like this. But then at some point after like the first Friday, because you teach him a little bit, I now add in the person moving with resistance and continually move that. So while I do think that you should still always put movement and a little tension into everything so that the person can feel what it's like to actually do the move, in the beginning, it's hard for them to kind of get that, especially if they're white belts. So the way I like to introduce it is I like to give them the move where it's kind of static. And then once you do the move like a couple times, we don't do static anymore. We start adding in the tensioning and then putting more and more tension and more tension. And then the person could troubleshoot from there what needs to be done. They kind of feel what they have to do. So I think there is a little bit of room for newbies, but for sure, I think if you have been doing jiu-jitsu, you have you've been there for a little bit, you should always be doing something with a little bit of tensioning. But that also requires your partner to be awake and be there and be mindful and putting effort into the training session. In my experience, a lot of people, they come in for social time, and that's great. I want there to be social time. But in my environment, I have a standard. And so my standard will be met no matter what, even if you are like not with it. My standard is a very minimum standard that I uphold by pro athletes and hobbyists alike. There's no difference. So with that standard in, everyone works together and they put a lot of effort on the mat, and they all get better. Maybe people get better faster, slower, whatever, but they all get better. And people who don't want to put that effort in, they usually don't get better, and they don't last long in my class.
Yep. You bring up a good point too about people getting better at different rates. It gets very easy to look at the person in the lane next to you and get jealous because they seem to be getting better faster than you. But the thing people have to understand is, first of all, we all have different levels of commitment to jiu-jitsu. If you are a hobbyist who's doing this for fun and you're putting in, 4 hours a week, you just realistically shouldn't be expecting that you can outperform and outgrow someone who's doing this as a full-time job. I think that hobbyists sometimes beat themselves up way more than they should. And I understand this, right? It is ultimately a competition sport, so it's easy to compare yourself to the person next to you. But look, you should be measuring your output relative to your goals and your input. I mean, if you're getting pretty decent at jiu-jitsu and you're spending 2 days a week doing it, that's a pretty good return, right? You're doing all right. If you want to be a world champion, then you're probably going to have to step up your training and make sacrifices elsewhere in your life. But for your goal of just being a hobbyist and being able to defend yourself on the street and perform in the gym, you shouldn't beat yourself up too much if you're just not able to hang with people who do this as a job.
Yeah. This is where it becomes funny, right? Because my girlfriend is actually a Master 1 world champion. She's a Master 1 world champion, and she's a Pan American world champion, and she's placed at the adults and also placed in other ones. But to even win Master Worlds is very hard. It's not like an easy thing to do, contrary to what other people might think. I think that if you have a goal range and you come in, you have to be honest with what your goals are first. What are your goals, right? Because if your goals are just to come in and train and have a hobby, that's great. You're going to get better at your own rate, and no matter what, you're going to get better jiu-jitsu. It's going to be awesome. You're going to work out. It's going to be cool. But if you have any competition desires, then you must put a lot more effort. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean you need to do what I do. I go above and beyond and really sacrifice every part of my life for jiu-jitsu, like every part of my life. So I'm always busy around jiu-jitsu, just always thinking about it, always doing my, make sure making my weights on point, my food, my knowledge, my studying, my training methods, my teaching, everything's just on point. Like I just give everything on my life to it. But that's my job. It's something I chose. So it's a little different. But the person who's like maybe a hobbyist but wants to do decent at competition, I still teach in a place. So my whole thing is running a class that a hobbyist and a pro can get the most out of. It doesn't matter if you're a hobbyist or a pro, you're going to get the most out of it. That's the way I structure my class. So if you ever want to compete, you could compete because we do everything that a competitor should do in my class. But the extra things like, that you need to sacrifice for, like, maybe like food and studying extra and doing maybe one or more sessions than you want to do, stuff like that. Those are things that you have to kind of pull up and discuss. I usually think that the more people, like the true champions, like the people who win all the time, or the people who win all the time are on the podiums all the time, even if they don't win first, those are the people who are usually putting in a lot of work in 24/7. Those are the people that you're going to see be repeat champions. But for instance, my girlfriend trains 6 days a week, doesn't train more than 6 days a week. I think she does like one extra class, but she trains when she shows up. So she's always putting that effort in. She's always doing the situations, always studying, always listening, always paying attention and doing it. And she's able to not only go compete and win the adults, but also compete at masters and win the world championship, which is super hard to do. So I think there's a thing where like, the hobby should not take it so crazy when they don't do as well as the people who've been doing it consistently for years on end, but also the person who is maybe a hobbyist / competitor. I like to call them like, the person in the gym who's going to help you prepare for the competition, but doesn't necessarily want to be like a world champion. You should also be able to grow and still be able to compete if you're doing a minimum of a consistency. So like doing 2 days a week and you want to compete, is very rare that you're just going to get those results. But if you're doing like, I'm a hobbyist, I come in, but I train and I sacrifice a certain portion of my life every morning for like 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and I put a lot of effort in year on end, you're going to be able to be really good, like really good. It's just inevitable. You'll be really good. You have to do it, train the right way, in my experience.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it kind of ties into the theme here, which is that when you are on a reduced training schedule, so if jiu-jitsu is a hobby for you, it's actually in a lot of ways more important to pick your shots and to be smart with where you spend your time, because your time is so much more limited. I mean, if you train 2 classes a week and you just come in and turn your brain off and you're kind of not really actively thinking about things, you're just doing what your coach tells you, you're probably not making maximal use of those 2 sessions a week, which is even worse because you only get 2 sessions a week. I mean, if you are a pro and you train 6 to 8 hours a day every day, you could use the most dog shit training method there is, and you're still going to get pretty decent just due to the volume. When you're a hobbyist or a part-timer, it's actually, at least in my mind, even more important to be thoughtful about where you focus your time because you have so much less of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I think that it's just so important to maximize and optimize that. I keep going back to that theme. Like, you optimize your training to the best ability you can. And like, I wish I would have done this when I was younger, when I was at purple belt, when I would just come in and honestly, I would just do what my professor showed me and I would just train hard, but I wasn't really paying attention to certain things. And I was very successful competing because obviously I've had the experience of competing and I loved training, and the techniques I did learn, I studied over and over again. But as far as like, I feel like being there and really like pushing limits and being more effort, it's just a different time in my life where I gave it my all, but like I was dealing with things in my life that kind of kept me from, I feel like, putting even more effort. And I always you talk to somebody who like, I say that, but I would I would train all day. But I think that now, especially like from 2020, especially even from 2021, and especially 2022 to 2023, I put in so much more effort than I thought possible. And it wasn't really just physical. It was just effort and everything. It was like making sure I just put so much effort into being in the room versus getting crazy about messing up a move or doing something crazy. It was just like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to do my best that I can do for this session. And then I'm going to move to the next session. I'm going to do my best to do this session. And, some people don't like to write things down. I write everything down. Everything you could possibly imagine, I write down. I know what I'm drilling, what day I'm drilling in, how many reps I need to drill that thing up. Or I really don't do reps. I do by like time. And then like I know what workouts I'm doing on this day and this day. So like for the last 2 weeks, I've been doing recovery training since the Worlds. And so I just been doing recovery workouts, but I know what recovery workout I'm doing each day. I know what recovery drills I'm doing. And then I know if it's a kind of like a free roll. Like so for instance, I'm going to have free rolls for the whole 90 minutes of free rolling. But for me, I won't really be free rolling. I'll be doing situational in my head. So I'll purposely be putting myself in positions to get better and stuff like that. That's just me personally. But like there's a time for free rolling and there's a time to make your time just the most optimized you could possibly make it. So for me, I'm over the top optimized. Like I'm over the top. Like I'm crazy about everything, you know, like especially after winning Worlds, I'm very like, okay, how do we get better? How do we make this even better? How do we get better, stronger, faster, even harder to beat? Submission rate goes up, all this stuff within the next like 5 months so that when I come back out, I am a different beast and different animal. And so like, that's what I'm currently calculating, stuff like that.
Now, I mean, just closing the loop here on all of this, how do you know that you're not doing too much optimization? How do you know that you're not overthinking things? Because of course, I'm granted when you're at the literally the highest level, any gain becomes much harder to get, right? Because the competition's so steep and the skill level is already so high. How would you know if you got to the point where you were over optimizing as opposed to doing healthy optimization at that level?
I think healthy optimization, it means more in tune with being right now in the present and putting more effort without worrying about winning and losing. You're a little bit better about optimizing your time because you're not so concerned with that. When you start going into a realm of like, you know, when you're a person who, like for me, for instance, I win a lot more than I lose, and I put myself in a lot of positions and I have hard rounds and stuff. But then when I start to get to, you'll start to notice when you'll start to unravel. And like for me, my unraveling is like I get really aggravated for somebody doing something that I feel is dumb, or like I get really upset that I didn't hit a move perfect even though I won the whole round and tapped a guy out like 10 times, but I got really upset about this one thing. Or I feel like my brain is taking too much information. I shut it down. I will stop studying for a day or two and I'll just go back into just being present and having fun. And that's how I kind of reset my brain to make sure that I don't overdo it, because I tend to overdo it, especially towards competitions. And I actually have to dial back and not do anything. I think it's important to, you know, not to overdo it, but you have to have a, you know, the fine lines of the balance. And it's hard because some people could take in more studying than others. So for me, I like to study in half-hour blocks. So I study in the morning, half hour, 40 minutes max, and then I'll take that information and I'll go and I'll work my day. And then the next day I'll study 40 minutes and I'll do that. And then maybe towards the weekend, I won't study as much so that I don't go off the deep end, right? Or then some weekends I will if I feel like I'm in a good mental state for it. So I think that's by person, right? Because I know some people that can study day in and day out and not get so burnt out. It takes them a lot longer to get burnt out. So it really just depends on the person, but it's important to recognize in yourself when you're starting to unravel and what those signs are for you. For me, it's me getting like my mood swings and it triggers my anxiety and stuff like that. And as soon as I start to feel like I'm doing that, it's time to shut it down. It's time to have some fun and just remember that we love jiu-jitsu first and foremost, that we choose to do this and we're choosing to study and it's nobody's putting a gun to our head.
Yeah. Well, amazing chat, Junny. Thanks so much for coming by. Any closing thoughts before we tie this up? Anything you wanted to get to which we didn't touch on yet?
No, I mean, I feel like I can talk about any subject for hours on end. I didn't have anything particular in my head, but no, man, I think that BJJ Mental Models, first off, is like pretty dope podcast. I actually had somebody come up to me and tell me about they heard they came to my class and thought I was a little bit crazy about like how I train and how like, you know, like crazy I am. And then they listened to the podcast and then they came back and they had so much respect for me. It was actually really interesting that happened like that. So I'm just happy to be back on it and hopefully I'll be back in the future. And I think that, yeah, maybe that's pretty much it. That's where my mind's at. Just really appreciate it to be back on.
Well, thanks a lot, man, for all the kind words. If people want to follow you or check out your work, or if you've got any instructionals you want to promote, where can people find all of that stuff?
Yeah, so all my instructionals are for now are going to be on BJJ Fanatics. There's about 15 instructionals there. I will have some new content coming out. I have a YouTube channel that you just look up Junny Ocasio, and you will find my YouTube channel, which I upload clips there, vlogs there, techniques, free rolling, stuff like that. And that's completely free. So if you want to check that out, that's cool. You can also follow me on IG, Junny _ BJJ, where I post pretty much, my workouts, some training, some comp footage and stuff like that. You can message me there if you want to get me for a private or a seminar. And then I got some future instructionals that I will be working on to try to get out in the first quarter of this year coming up, which I will probably, one will be on BJJ Fanatics, and then one will be on a new platform that's very well known. So I'm very happy to do that. So just be on the lookout. I will be redoing the Z-Lock instructional, and I'll be coming out with the Junny Lock instructional, which is going to be really dope. And yeah, if you need to find me there, you could always email me. All my emails are located on both YouTube and everywhere that you can reach me, like IG and Twitter. I have a Twitter account. I don't run my Twitter account, so if you go on Twitter account, it's not me you're talking to. It's probably my girlfriend. And you could always message me there too.
Nice. Well, as I always do, I will put all of those links in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you. I'll also put a link to our stuff. BJJMentalModels.com is where everything lives, so pretty easy to find it all in one place. Main reason you'd want to go there is because there's hundreds of hours of educational jiu-jitsu audio on concepts, strategy, tactics available for free in the public podcast feed. Of course, there's also our newsletter, which I definitely recommend people sign up to as well, also free through the website. And then the last thing is, if you do want to kick it up to the next level, BJJ Mental Models Premium is how we float the boat around here. All of that is also at the same website, BJJMentalModels.com. Reason you'd want to sign up for that is because, number one, you get access to our entire course library. We've got over 100 hours of audio masterclasses on strategy, concepts, tactics, just a really interesting look at jiu-jitsu that you won't get through traditional instructionals. You also get access to all of our premium podcasts, including the one that Junny was talking about with Emily. We've got an amazing premium podcast hosted by Emily Kwok and Joe Hannon. It's called The Highest Levels, kind of unpacking her studies and experiences with training and coaching peak performance. Really recommend that. And you also get direct rolling reviews. We've got an amazing black belt review team with literally some of the best black belts in the world available there to provide feedback on your sparring. People always talk about how it can be challenging to get value out of instructionals because there's just so much there and it's not tailored to you. It's just a total game changer when you see instructional material that is quite literally tailored around exactly what you need. If you're not doing tape review and if you're not having someone break down and review your footage, I always definitely recommend giving that a try, and Premium is a great place to do that. So again, that, and of course you also get access to our awesome community, so you can chat with me in the group anytime. Again, all of that's at BJJMentalModels.com if you're interested, as well as all of Junny's links as well. But Junny, man, thanks so much for coming by. I'm just so excited to see where you're going next. 2023 was such a breakout year for you. It was amazing to see everything you accomplished. And again, man, let's have you back on the podcast at some point to check in next year and see how things go.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a crazy year, and I hope to break boundaries in the 2024. So for sure, I'm just excited to see where that year goes. We'll see.
Nice. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on you, man. Thanks a lot for coming by here, and best of luck.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, man. And thanks to the listeners, too. We'll talk to you next week. Take care.